Welcome back to the synthesis phase of the orthographic drawing series. In this video we will discuss some compositional techniques discovered and developed by students through their architectural project presentations. One thing to note in starting, that there is never a single bulletproof strategy when putting together a presentation. Each presentation has different constraints and the shape and extent of drawing differs each time. Having said that though, with observation and your own trial and error, you will develop a repertoire of strategies that you will tend to draw upon and adapt with each subsequent presentation. The three important things to note is to keep your eyes open always to new ideas and approaches. Secondly, you need to plan ahead, and finally, you need to take a coordinated approach. This first presentation spans across 3 panels in a vertical format. It is important to plan the orientation, and most times the sequence of the panels on the wall needs to be spelt out so that the narrative is clear and consistent. This presentation is quite loose and adopts a simple approach using 6 basic drawings. The simplicity of the approach is that the colour and type of drawings unifies across and between the panels. Green tones and 2-dimensional orthographic drawings are used along the top of the panels, and a yellow tone with 3-dimensional drawings are used along the bottom. The simplicity of the approach means that if the order of the panels on the wall gets mixed up, it is not critical. The shortcoming of this presentation though are the lack of coordinating information such as obvious drawing titles, scales, and the lack of a finer grained explanation of key ideas through party diagrams or the like. Working across a variety of scales rather than just the one scale, in this instance, perhaps would allow more depth to the presentation. This next presentation echoes one of the key ideas of the design proposal it is presenting and deploys it as a compositional element in the drawing. The panels place greatest emphasis on the emotional content of the presentation and lets the more basic orthographic drawings drop down in scale and take a background role in conveying the scale and configuration of the proposal. The series of vertical lines tying the 2 panels together serve as a way to underline the key building compositional rhythm and help draw out the ideas of the building in a more subtle way. The major emphasis is placed on the 3-dimensional views and the context that the building is situated in. Colour rendering in this instance is concentrated for maximum effect. Using colour is always a time-consuming process to get it right, so using it strategically in smaller areas allows you to dedicate your time to best effect. Deploying colour everywhere spreads your time more thinly and also dilutes the potential drama of the colour. This example adopts a 4-panel presentation format. Like the presentation beforehand, a key idea of the design proposal helped inform the compositional strategy of the presentation. One of the key ideas of this design was the simultaneous separation and unity of the 2 pavilions connected by a bridge. This was driven in part by the design problem of the brief. When trying to develop a strategy for your presentation, think first about your design ideas, and perhaps on reflection, something about your design will trigger ideas for your presentation composition. The idea of the presentation is quite derivative of Marion Mahoney Griffin, but is used to great effect and executed quite thoughtfully and thoroughly. The overall presentation is framed by a foreground landscape motif that blends with the other landscape entourage. The frame breaks in places to convey the continuity of the drawing between the left and right hand panels. The strategy allowed the author to carefully control and frame the use of colour so that it was done simply but also with good effect. The use of colour also provides a new layer of meaning, with a sunset view shown in combination with a daytime view. This could have been problematic if the colours were not managed well overall. In this case, the upper panels use warm colours and reds, whereas the lower panels use cooler colours such as blues and greens. The careful gradation and separation of colours helps maintain the clean aesthetics and legibility of this presentation. For the final presentation for the Arch 1160 course, the requirements are for a 3-panel presentation. Using 3 panels limits your layout options to some degree, as odd numbers of panels immediately give some panels more significance than others by the fact that they are more central to the overall composition. The pattern of odd versus even number of panels needs to be acknowledged in the first instance, so that your composition works with and capitalizes on the different impressions of the layout. The additional constraint in this instance is that the individual panels need to be a horizontal format, resulting in a column arrangement or a long row. This first presentation stacks the 3 panels one above the other. It tries to adopt the technique of the Japanese woodblock prints and uses the middle ground as a device that helps unify and at the same time obscure the differences between the types of drawings. The middle ground in this instance starts as a lake on the top panel and ends up as the sky on the bottom. The strategic placement of the section at the bottom and the three-dimensional drawing at the top enable this composition to maintain some kind of inner logic. The vertical arrangement on the wall with the three-dimensional drawing on the upper panel helps balance the overall composition in a way that the presentation seems to hang from the top and then read down. The more basic orthographic drawings comprising the plans and sections are dropped down a scale and placed in neutral parts of the composition so that they form a critical background of information whilst not competing with the overall composition. Getting the big things right is critical with any presentation. However, getting the small things right as well is the difference between doing a good job and really nailing it. The thoroughness of drawing titles is something this presentation lacks overall. Also, you need to be careful with the scale and type of entourage. Trees are not just trees. Some diversity of entourage helps give the scene some more believability. Use a photograph of the actual site to help with establishing the background entourage. Also, pay close attention to things like shadows and reflections to make sure that they are accurately depicted. Here, the angular reflection of the pavilion is not correct, and it detracts from the overall quality of the drawing. The issue of coordination and drawing information is evident on all the pages of this presentation. It's a small thing that means a lot, and it does not take time to do well and to do thoroughly. Also, try to avoid repeating similar drawings on the same page. In this instance, the roof plan was used to create the site plan as well as the overall plan. Repeating information for the sake of filling out the sheet and the requirements is not a good approach. If the larger plan in this instance was a proper plan, the presentation would have been more balanced and informative. Finally, whilst the overall composition is good, the individual drawings require a similar amount of attention to detail. One of the biggest shortcomings with student presentations is when buildings do not sit into or onto the ground properly. The building's relationship with the ground needs to be properly resolved and drawn. The floating building syndrome demonstrates a lack of engagement with the context despite the amount of trees shown in the presentation. On a very basic level, the depiction and resolution of the ground line in section and elevation and in the three-dimensional drawings needs to be absolutely right. This presentation takes the second approach and lines up the drawings in a row. In this instance, the alignment and continuity of the section and elevation drawings helps to unify the composition. The bookending of the presentation with the three-dimensional views also helps to close the composition. In this instance, the central panel is given the most prominence by way of containing the most drawings as well as the most colour. Other ways of setting this composition out may have been to make a more dynamically balanced composition by using a larger three-dimensional view on the left and using the colour strip on the right panel. This would have given the opportunity for a more persuasive money shot on the left-hand side. At the moment, both three-dimensional images are of a similar scale to each other, as well as a similar scale or size as the orthographic drawings. There is no punchy impact that draws the viewer in to help convey a stronger identity to the scheme being presented. The notes on this presentation are more thorough, however, we are still missing the scale bar, and the accuracy of the integration with the ground is also problematic. The ground line is also a problem in the other sections and elevations, and perhaps the coloured strip could have been more neatly deployed, making it more vertical rather than bending it around to the west elevation. And although the scale bar is shown on this final panel, you need to adopt the principle that each panel needs to be read interdependently, that is, as a whole as well as individually. Therefore, scale bars, north points and labels should be shown on each sheet in subtle ways that are well coordinated. Many tips and strategies were discussed in the lecture Representation of the World. The approach outlined on the next few slides builds on the lecture and attempts to convey more of the workflow and compositional approaches. Fundamentally, any presentation needs to be planned in advance. We understand the issues of time constraints and that there is often a focus in simply getting the job done. However, it is rare that the first compositional idea of your presentation works perfectly, so it is useful to rough out some ideas first to avoid creating a presentation that does not work, but it is too late to change. From the first idea, the The composition should be roughed out on the sheet size that will be used for the final presentation. You should use copies of your base drawings and lay out the composition in a rough way, taping the drawings down and sketching the elements such as the entourage and other missing elements quickly to help complete the narrative and the compositional idea of the presentation. These rough outs should be done quickly and then analysed when pinned up on the wall. It is important to get the different viewpoint and the distance to adequately assess the composition and legibility of the presentation. Ask a friend for their opinion and reflect upon the rough ideas before reworking them prior to embarking on the final version. Don't forget the small things that help coordinate drawings and make them readable. These include a simple coding system that shows how the sheets should be arranged on the wall, include scale bars on each sheet as required, as well as north points, heights, room names, contour levels, and simple things like stair arrows and section markers. The inclusion of these small elements will add maybe an hour to the time to complete your presentation, but are critical in the communication, and dropping them can significantly affect the readability and assessment of your presentation. Make sure that you are also on top of the technical issues that you will use for your presentation. It is always good policy to print the work in progress to ascertain that the various drawings coming from a variety of production streams appear consistent on the final panels side by side. Whatever compositional strategy you decide upon, make sure that there is a legibility and consistency across the presentation. The mix and match approach rarely works, and the same can be said with the size and type of fonts used in a presentation. Make sure that you limit the number of fonts, and in my opinion, any more than 2 fonts in any presentation should be avoided. This now ends the instructional covering student presentations. We hope that this has given you some great ideas and tips, and we look forward to seeing your thoughtfully created presentations in the future. Good luck, and thanks for watching.